Picture this. Someone calls your name across a crowded room, and instantly, without conscious thought, your entire nervous system responds. Your head turns, your posture shifts, your attention locks in completely. That split-second reaction reveals something profound about how deeply your identity is wired into the sounds that define you. But here's what neuroscientists are discovering. Most of us are living under borrowed frequencies. The names we answer to, the labels we've accepted, even the internal voice narrating our thoughts, they're often echoes of other people's expectations rather than authentic self-recognition. Ancient cultures understood something we've forgotten. Your true name isn't just a label, it's a frequency signature. They called it your ren, the living tone that represents who you actually are beneath all the social conditioning. When adopted children finally learn their birth names, or when performers choose stage names that suddenly unlock new aspects of their personality, they're tapping into this principle. Most people have never heard their real name spoken, not even by themselves. The noise never stops, does it? Even right now, as you're watching this, part of your mind is probably tracking that notification sound from your phone, or calculating how much time you have left before your next obligation, or rehearsing what you need to say in tomorrow's meeting. This isn't living, this is surviving in a state of perpetual mental fragmentation. But here's what most people don't realize. This constant disconnection from your inner voice isn't an accident of modern life. It's the foundation of a system that requires your confusion to function. Think about the last time you sat in complete silence for more than 5 minutes. Not meditation, not waiting for something, just existing without input. If you're like most people, that memory is either non-existent or uncomfortable. We've been conditioned to interpret silence as emptiness, when in reality, silence is where your authentic self speaks loudest. The systematic silencing of your inner guidance begins with what I call attention hijacking. Your smartphone alone interrupts your natural thought patterns an average of 150 times per day. Each buzz, ping, and flash pulls you out of whatever internal process was developing and redirects your focus to external demands. Over time, your brain literally rewires itself to expect these interruptions, creating what neuroscientists call continuous partial attention. But the deeper manipulation happens through comparison culture. Social media algorithms have discovered something profound about human psychology. People who are uncertain about their identity engage more consistently than those who are secure in themselves. The platforms literally profit from your self-doubt. Every carefully curated post you see is designed to trigger either inadequacy or superiority, both emotions that keep you scrolling, seeking external validation for internal questions only you can answer. Watch how this plays out in your own life. You post something authentic, something that genuinely represents who you are, and it gets 12 likes. Then you post something performative, a trendy opinion, a lifestyle shot that isn't quite honest, and it explodes. The algorithm just taught you that authenticity doesn't pay, but performance does. After enough repetitions, you stop knowing the difference. This creates what I call identity outsourcing. Instead of developing an internal compass, you become dependent on external feedback loops. Your worth gets measured by looks, likes, paychecks, and the temperature of other people's moods. A stranger's criticism can destabilize your entire day because you've lost access to your own internal validation system. The consumer economy depends on this disconnection. Think about it. A person who knows their true name, their authentic desires, values, and purpose is harder to steer, harder to buy, harder to shame. They don't impulse purchase solutions to problems they don't actually have. They don't chase status symbols that mean nothing to them personally. They don't stay in jobs that slowly kill their spirit just to afford lifestyles that don't bring them joy. So the system keeps you busy, efficient, praised, and hollow. You achieve goals that were never truly yours and feel empty at the moment of victory. You attend social events where you perform rather than participate, then drive home exhausted from maintaining a persona that isn't quite you. You make decisions based on what looks good on paper rather than what feels right in your bones. The educational system plays its role perfectly in this orchestration. From kindergarten forward, you're rewarded for conformity and punished for authentic self-expression. Sit still, raise your hand, give the expected answer, don't question the curriculum. The message is clear. Your natural impulses are wrong, your curiosity is disruptive, and success means becoming indistinguishable from everyone else who followed the same path. By the time you reach adulthood, the disconnection has become physiological. Your breathing has become shallow because deep breathing requires slowing down long enough to feel what's actually happening in your body. Your jaw stays clenched because relaxing it might let out words you're not supposed to say. You carry a constant low-level anxiety that you've learned to call normal, not recognizing it as your authentic self trying to signal that something is fundamentally wrong with how you're living. This is why criticism from strangers can derail your entire week. This is why achieving major goals often feels anticlimactic. This is why you can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone. You've been systematically disconnected from the only voice that could guide you toward genuine fulfillment, your own. The most insidious part is how this disconnection masquerades as sophistication. We're taught that listening to your inner voice is naive, that following your intuition is impractical, that trusting your gut is primitive. Real adults make decisions based on data, logic, and social expectations. But what they don't tell you is that all the external data in the world is useless if you don't know who you actually are or what you genuinely want. Some of the most powerful techniques for reclaiming your authentic voice are too sensitive to share publicly, which is why we reserve them for our free Insights Academy newsletter. You'll also receive a complimentary copy of the Kybalion for a limited time. These practices go beyond surface-level advice and address the deeper patterns of disconnection that keep most people trapped in cycles of external seeking. The physical symptoms of chronic disconnection tell the real story. That tension in your shoulders isn't from poor posture, it's from carrying expectations that aren't yours. The insomnia isn't from too much caffeine, it's from a mind that can't rest because it's constantly processing other people's opinions about your choices. The digestive issues aren't from stress eating, they're from swallowing words and feelings that were meant to be expressed. Your body has been trying to tell you something for years, but the noise of modern life has drowned out its whispers. Every headache, every tight muscle, every moment of unexplained sadness is your authentic self attempting to communicate that the life you're living doesn't match the person you actually are. But recognizing these patterns is the first step toward reclaiming your authentic guidance system. Once you see how systematically your inner voice has been silenced, you can begin to understand why ancient cultures developed such sophisticated methods for protecting and cultivating this inner knowing. They understood something we've forgotten, that a person connected to their true name, their authentic nature, is not just harder to control, but capable of creating realities that serve life rather than systems. This isn't about rejecting all external input or becoming a hermit. It's about developing the discernment to know which voices deserve access to your inner landscape and which ones are simply noise designed to keep you confused, consuming, and compliant. The moment you realize your authentic self has been buried under layers of borrowed expectations, something fascinating happens in your nervous system. Your heart rate shifts, your breathing deepens, and for just an instant you feel more solid in your own body. The ancient Egyptians had a name for this phenomenon. They called it recognizing your true Ren. But here's what most people don't understand about Egyptian wisdom. It wasn't mystical philosophy. It was practical psychology developed by people who understood something we're only now rediscovering through modern neuroscience. Picture this. You're a temple initiate in ancient Egypt, surrounded by the same social pressures we face today. Expectations from family, demands from authority figures, the constant pull to conform and play roles that don't actually fit who you are. The temple priests noticed something crucial. People who lost touch with their core identity became easier to manipulate, more anxious, and physically less stable. They literally observed how social conditioning affected posture, breathing patterns, and decision-making capacity. So they developed what they called Ren technology, specific practices to maintain what we might call authentic self-recognition under pressure. Your Ren wasn't some mystical concept. It was your capacity to feel the difference between who you actually are and who others expect you to be. And they discovered that this capacity could be measured, strengthened, and protected through specific techniques. One of their key insights involved sound, what they called Heka, or the power of aligned vibration. Now, before you dismiss this as ancient superstition, consider what we know today about vagal tone and nervous system regulation. When you speak or hum in certain frequencies, particularly lower, resonant tones, you literally activate your vagus nerve, which shifts your autonomic nervous system out of fight or flight mode and into what researchers call the social engagement system. I discovered this accidentally during a particularly stressful period when I was constantly second-guessing myself, trying to meet everyone else's expectations. A friend suggested I try humming for 5 minutes each morning, not meditation, just humming. Within a week, I noticed something remarkable. I could feel the difference between my authentic responses and my conditioned reactions. The humming wasn't magic. It was regulating my nervous system enough that I could actually sense my own preferences again. The Egyptians understood this connection between sound, nervous system regulation, and authentic self-recognition, thousands of years before we had the scientific language to explain it. They observed that people who maintained regular vocal practices, specific tones and frequencies, remained more centered in their own identity, even under intense social pressure. They also developed what they called the Jed pillar concept, which sounds mystical until you realize they were describing what we now call proprioceptive awareness. Proprioception is your felt sense of your body's position in space, and it turns out to be crucial for psychological stability. When you're disconnected from your physical center, when you're literally ungrounded, you become more susceptible to external influence and internal doubt. Think about it. When you're nervous or trying to please someone, what happens to your posture? You probably lean forward slightly, hold your breath, maybe tense your shoulders. The Egyptians noticed that people who maintained what they called Jed awareness, a strong sense of their physical center, could maintain their authentic responses, even in challenging social situations. But perhaps their most sophisticated insight was what they called Ma'at's feather test. Most people think this was about moral judgment in the afterlife, but the practical application was far more immediate. Temple practitioners literally measured the weight of emotional baggage by observing how different thoughts and memories affected someone's breathing and posture. Here's how it worked. They would have someone stand in their natural posture, breathing normally, then ask them to recall specific memories or consider particular decisions. They watched for subtle changes. Did the person's shoulders rise? Did their breathing become shallow? Did they shift their weight or lose their center? These physical responses revealed which experiences were carrying emotional charge and which decisions aligned with the person's authentic nature. This wasn't judgment, it was practical assessment. They understood that unresolved emotional weight, what we might call trauma or conditioning, literally affected someone's ability to maintain their authentic identity under pressure. The lightness they were measuring wasn't moral purity, it was psychological freedom. This knowledge didn't stay in Egypt. It traveled through the Greek Orphic mysteries, where initiates learned to maintain authentic self-recognition through specific breathing and vocal practices. It influenced Indian pranayama traditions, where practitioners discovered that controlled breathing patterns could maintain mental clarity under intense social or spiritual pressure. Sufi Dika practices developed similar techniques, repetitive vocal patterns that regulate the nervous system while maintaining awareness of one's essential nature. All of these traditions were solving the same fundamental problem. How do you remain true to yourself when surrounded by competing demands, expectations, and pressures to conform? How do you maintain access to your authentic responses when everyone around you has opinions about who you should be? They discovered that authentic self-recognition isn't a philosophical concept. It's a measurable capacity that can be developed through specific practices. And here's why this knowledge was often kept quiet. People who maintain strong self-recognition are genuinely harder to manipulate through fear, shame, or artificial scarcity. They can feel the difference between authentic opportunities and manufactured urgency. They're less likely to abandon their own judgment in favor of external authority. This isn't about rebellion or rejecting all social connection. It's about developing the capacity to choose consciously which roles and expectations serve your authentic development and which ones drain your vitality. It's about being able to feel the difference in your own body between decisions that align with your nature and decisions that serve someone else's agenda. The remarkable thing is, you can test this immediately. Right now, think about a decision you're facing. Something where you feel pulled between what you think you should do and what feels authentic to you. Notice what happens in your body when you consider each option. Does one make you feel more solid, more centered? Does the other create tension, shallow breathing, or a sense of contracting away from yourself? That's your ren speaking, your capacity for authentic self-recognition. And just like the ancient practitioners discovered, this capacity can be strengthened through specific, measurable practices that work with your nervous system rather than against it. The question isn't whether you have this capacity, you do. The question is whether you're willing to develop it, even when the people around you might prefer the more compliant version of yourself. Now comes the hardest part of reclaiming who you really are, recognizing how completely you've become someone else's idea of who you should be. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Picture meeting yourself at age 5. That child had preferences that made no logical sense to anyone else. Maybe they insisted on wearing winter boots in summer, or they talked to trees, or they had an inexplicable fascination with the sound of vacuum cleaners. They weren't performing these preferences for approval, they were simply being authentic to their inner experience. Now fast forward to today. When was the last time you had a preference that strong? When did you last feel that kind of unshakable knowing about what felt right to you, regardless of whether it made sense to anyone else? The reason this question feels difficult to answer isn't because you've lost your authentic preferences. It's because you've spent decades building an identity out of borrowed definitions, and those definitions now feel more familiar than your actual self. Here's what I mean by borrowed identity. Sarah, a client of mine, realized at 38 that she genuinely didn't know if she enjoyed reading. She'd been called the smart one since childhood, so she read constantly, collected books, and built her entire social identity around literary discussions. But when she sat quietly and asked herself whether she actually enjoyed the act of reading, she felt nothing. No genuine pull, no authentic desire. She'd been performing intelligence for so long that she'd lost track of what actually engaged her mind. Or consider Marcus, who discovered that his entire personality was built around being the easygoing guy. He'd spent 20 years automatically agreeing with whatever others suggested, smoothing over conflicts, and adapting his opinions to match whoever he was with. When friends asked what restaurant he preferred, he felt genuine confusion. He'd trained himself so thoroughly to want whatever others wanted that his own preferences had become inaccessible. These aren't unusual cases. Neuroscientist Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research shows that when we repeatedly receive external validation for certain behaviors, our brain's reward pathways literally rewire themselves. The dopamine hit we get from being seen as smart or agreeable or successful becomes more familiar and accessible than the quieter satisfaction of authentic self-expression. This is why authentic self-recognition can feel foreign or even uncomfortable at first. You've trained your nervous system to respond to external validation rather than internal alignment. Your brain has become addicted to the drama of performance, so the steady quiet of authenticity can feel like something's wrong. The borrowed identities we carry usually trace back to early caregiver responses. Attachment research reveals that children unconsciously adapt their authentic expression to maintain connection with their caregivers. If your curiosity was met with impatience, you learned to perform certainty instead. If your sensitivity was labeled as too much, you developed a tougher persona. If your natural pace was called lazy, you became the overachiever who can't stop performing even in private moments. The insidious part is that these masks feel personal because you've worn them for so long. They've become neurological pathways, automatic responses, familiar ways of moving through the world. But they're still masks. Here's a practical exercise that cuts through this confusion. Throughout your day, start noticing your thoughts and asking one simple question. Is this my name or a label I borrowed? When you think, I'm not good with money, pause. Is this your authentic self-knowledge, or did someone else's judgment become your internal voice? When you think, I'm the responsible one, notice whether this feels like genuine self-recognition or a role you've been performing. I need to warn you about what to expect when you start this practice. Initially, you'll experience resistance. Your mind will insist that these borrowed identities are who you really are. You might feel like you're losing solid ground, like if you let go of these familiar definitions, you might disappear entirely. This fear actually proves the exercise is working. Borrowed identities feel dramatic and inflated because they require constant maintenance. Authentic identity feels stable and quiet because it doesn't need to be defended or performed. The key is learning to identify with what the ancient traditions called the listener, that observing awareness that remains constant while thoughts and emotions change. This isn't the voice in your head commenting on everything. It's the aware presence that hears the voice. Practically, this feels like taking a tiny step backward inside your chest. Instead of leaning forward into every thought and emotion, you learn to rest in the spacious awareness that experiences them. When the thought, I'm not creative, arises, Instead of immediately believing it or fighting it, you notice there's a thought about creativity happening. This isn't dissociation or emotional numbing. It's integration, learning to identify with the part of you that experiences thoughts rather than with the thoughts themselves. It's the difference between being caught in a storm and watching it pass through the sky. Some labels will feel harder to release than others. The identities that formed earliest, or that helped you survive difficult circumstances, will have deeper roots. Be patient with this process. You're not trying to destroy these aspects of yourself. You're learning to hold them lightly rather than being trapped by them. If the process feels scary, remember that you're not losing anything real. You're clearing away what was never actually yours to begin with. This creates space for something much more stable to emerge, not another identity to perform, but the simple recognition of what you actually are beneath all the borrowed definitions. The room behind the words, the awareness that remains when all the labels fall away. This is what we're making space for. This is where your authentic self-recognition lives, and it's been waiting patiently for you to remember it was always there. What borrowed identity feels most familiar to you right now? Notice it without trying to change it. Just see how it feels to recognize it as something you picked up rather than something you are. Now that you understand how borrowed identities have been layered onto your authentic self, let's explore the precise method for accessing what lies beneath. This isn't about meditation retreats or years of therapy. It's about understanding how your nervous system recognizes its own natural state and learning to activate that recognition on command. The technique I'm about to share works because it targets the specific physiological pathways your body uses to distinguish between safety and threat. When you're operating from borrowed identity, your nervous system remains in a subtle state of vigilance, constantly scanning for approval, rejection, or signs that your persona might be failing. This creates what researchers call allostatic load, the wear and tear of maintaining an artificial baseline. Your vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in your body, acts like a sophisticated radar system. It's constantly sampling your internal environment and making split-second decisions about whether you're safe enough to be authentic or whether you need to maintain protective patterns. The problem is, most people's vagus nerve has been trained to associate authenticity with danger. Every time you were told to be nice when you felt angry or calm down when you were excited, your nervous system learned to equate your natural responses with threat. But here's what's remarkable. You can retrain this system using the same precision engineers use to calibrate sensitive instruments. The key lies in working with barely perceptible signals rather than dramatic interventions. When you try too hard to relax or force yourself to be authentic, you actually activate the very vigilance you're trying to dissolve. The technique centers on 3 specific adjustments that create measurable shifts in nervous system state. First, there's a particular breathing pattern that activates what's called the parasympathetic rebound effect. Instead of the deep breathing most people attempt, you're going to use an extended exhale that's exactly twice the length of your inhale. This isn't arbitrary, it's the precise ratio that triggers your nervous system's natural braking mechanism. But the real breakthrough happens with the second component, vocal vibration at the threshold of audibility. When you hum at the quietest possible volume, so quiet you can barely hear it yourself, something fascinating occurs. The vibrations activate mechanoreceptors in your chest cavity without triggering the performance anxiety that comes with louder vocalizations. Your nervous system interprets this as, I'm safe enough to make sound without defending myself. Most people completely miss this because they think louder must be better. But your vagus nerve responds to subtlety, not force. Think about how a cat purrs. It's not broadcasting to the world. It's creating internal resonance. That barely audible hum creates what acoustics researchers call bone conduction, vibrations that travel through your skeletal structure and signal deep safety to your brainstem. The third element involves what I call proprioceptive integration, helping your nervous system recognize your body as a stable, coherent structure rather than something you need to brace against the world. This isn't about perfect posture. It's about finding the specific alignment where your skeleton supports itself with minimal muscular effort. When you discover this, there's a distinct sensation I describe as becoming a pillar, not rigid but effortlessly upright. Here's the exact sequence. Begin with that extended exhale, breathe in for 4 counts, out for 8. Do this 3 times, focusing not on relaxation but on precision. Your nervous system responds to consistency, not intensity. After the third exhale, close your mouth and create the quietest hum you can produce. Not a melody, just a steady, barely audible vibration. Let it continue for about 10 seconds, then stop and simply notice. This is where most people expect fireworks and miss the actual signal. You're not looking for transcendent experiences or emotional breakthroughs. Instead, notice subtle shifts. Does your attention rest differently? Do sounds seem to reach your ears with less effort? Is there a change in how your thoughts move through awareness? The difference is often described as thoughts still passing through your mind, but they're no longer grabbing you by the collar. This isn't poetic language. It's describing the measurable difference between reactive and responsive nervous system states. In reactive mode, thoughts trigger immediate emotional and physical responses. In responsive mode, there's a gap, a moment where you recognize the thought without being hijacked by it. If the hum feels forced or artificial, you're trying too hard. Back off until it's almost imperceptible. If nothing seems to happen, resist the urge to do more. Your nervous system learns through gentle repetition, not forceful striving. Sometimes people experience unexpected emotions during this practice, not because the technique is releasing anything, but because dropping vigilance allows you to notice what was already present. The physiological markers are subtle but consistent. Your breathing naturally deepens without effort. Muscle tension shifts from bracing to supporting, and there's often a change in peripheral vision. The world seems to have more space around the edges. These aren't mystical signs. They're indicators that your nervous system has shifted from a state of subtle defense to one of alert presence. This is why the technique works as what I call a portable reset. Once your nervous system recognizes this state, you can access it quickly, in traffic, during conflict, in moments of doubt. The key is establishing it first in neutral conditions, then gradually testing it in mild stress before relying on it during intense situations. The real test is this. After completing the sequence, ask yourself a question you've been avoiding. Notice whether you can stay present with whatever arises, or whether you immediately jump to familiar patterns of analysis, justification, or emotional reaction. The difference reveals whether you're accessing authentic self-recognition or still operating from borrowed identity. In our next section, we'll explore exactly what that authentic voice sounds like when it finally speaks, and why it might surprise you with its simplicity and clarity. Now that we've explored the theory behind accessing your authentic self-recognition, let's put it to an immediate test. I'm going to walk you through what I call the 10-second reality check, a rapid demonstration that can shift your nervous system state faster than your mind can mount its usual resistance. Why 10 seconds? Neuroscience research shows this is the sweet spot for measurable autonomic changes without triggering performance anxiety. Your parasympathetic nervous system can initiate significant shifts in as little as 6 to 8 seconds of controlled breathing, while your sympathetic fight or flight response typically needs 12 to 15 seconds to fully activate its defensive patterns. We're working in that narrow window where change happens before resistance kicks in. Here's what's fascinating about vocal vibrations and heart rate variability. When you create specific sounds, you're not just making noise, you're sending direct signals to your vagus nerve, which immediately communicates with your heart rhythm. Studies from the HeartMath Institute demonstrate that humming at certain frequencies can shift heart rate variability patterns within 3 to 4 heartbeats. This isn't mystical, it's measurable physiology. But here's what makes this different from typical breathing exercises or meditation techniques. We're not trying to achieve some special state or transcendent experience. We're simply creating conditions for you to recognize what's already here beneath the mental commentary. Think of it like tuning a radio. The signal exists whether you're tuned in or not. Let me walk you through this step by step, and I'll explain what's happening at each stage. We'll count backwards from 10. At 10, you'll take a slow, complete exhale. This immediately activates your parasympathetic nervous system and signals safety to your body. Maximum parasympathetic activation happens during the exhale phase, particularly when it's longer than the inhale. This isn't about emptying your lungs dramatically, just a natural, complete release of breath. At 7, you'll begin a gentle hum on your next exhale. This timing is crucial. Your nervous system has had 3 seconds to register the safety signal from that first exhale, and now we're adding the vagal stimulation from vocal vibrations. The hum doesn't need to be loud or perfect. You're creating internal vibration that your heart and nervous system can feel. At 3, you'll let the hum fade into silence. This pause allows your system to register the new state without immediately jumping back into mental activity. Think of it as letting the ripples settle on a pond. The effect is there, but you need a moment of stillness to notice it. At 1, you'll simply notice whatever's here and silently recognize, I am. Not, I am someone, or I am something. Just the simple recognition of aware presence that's always been here, underneath all the mental noise about who you think you should be. Ready? Find a comfortable position, and let's discover what's actually here when you're not trying to be anyone in particular. 10. Take a slow, complete exhale. Let everything go. 9. Just breathing naturally now. 8. Nothing to achieve or figure out. 7. Begin a gentle hum on this exhale. Let the vibration fill your chest. 6. Keep that soft hum going. Feel it in your body. 5. Still humming. Notice how it feels inside. 4. Let the hum continue, vibrating through you. 3. Let the hum fade to silence now. Just quiet. 2. Rest in this stillness. Nothing to do. 1. Simply notice what's here. I am. Take a moment. What did you notice? Some of you might have felt a distinct shift. Maybe your vision seemed to soften or focus differently. Sounds might have reached your awareness with less mental filtering, or your body might feel more settled in space, like you've dropped into yourself more fully. Others might notice that for a few seconds, your thoughts lost their usual authority over your attention. They didn't disappear, they just became background noise instead of the main event. This difference between thoughts disappearing versus losing their authority is crucial. When you're hijacked by mental content, thoughts feel like urgent, important information you must respond to immediately. When you're resting in authentic self-recognition, thoughts become more like sounds in the distance. You can hear them, but they don't automatically grab your attention or dictate your internal state. The range of responses to this exercise varies dramatically, and that's completely normal. Some people feel dramatic shifts the first time, a sudden sense of spaciousness, or what they describe as coming home to themselves. Others notice subtle changes they might not even recognize as significant. Maybe their shoulders dropped, their breathing naturally deepened, or they felt less urgency about whatever was bothering them before we started. Some of you might think you felt nothing at all during those 10 seconds, but then realize you feel different now, calmer, more present, less caught up in whatever mental story was running before. This delayed recognition is actually common because we're often so focused on having an experience that we miss the experience we're actually having. Here's what I want you to understand. If you felt even one clean second of this, one moment where you weren't trying to be anyone, weren't solving any problems, weren't maintaining any image, your ren is online. You've just accessed authentic self-recognition, probably for the first time in years. For those who felt nothing yet, this doesn't mean you're doing it wrong or that this doesn't work for you. Some nervous systems need more repetition to recognize safety. If you've been in chronic stress or hypervigilance, your system might be so accustomed to scanning for threats that it takes several rounds before it can relax enough to notice subtler states. Precision beats effort every time with this work. You're not trying to force an experience or manufacture a feeling. You're creating optimal conditions and then simply noticing what's already present. Think of it like developing film in a dark room. The image is already there on the negative, but it needs the right conditions to become visible. Consistency matters more than intensity. Doing this simple sequence once a day for a week will create more lasting change than trying to have some profound breakthrough experience once. You're literally creating new neural pathways. Pathways that recognize authentic presence as safe and available rather than something you have to earn or achieve. Let me address some common concerns. First, am I doing this right? If you followed the sequence and paid attention to what happened, you're doing it right. There's no perfect way to breathe, hum, or recognize I am. Second, shouldn't this feel more dramatic? Not necessarily. The most profound shifts often feel surprisingly ordinary, like remembering something you'd forgotten rather than discovering something new. Third, is this just relaxation or something deeper? While you might feel relaxed, what we're accessing is the foundation that allows genuine relaxation. Most relaxation techniques are still effortful. You're doing something to achieve a state. This is about recognizing what's here when you're not doing anything to be anyone in particular. This brief taste of authentic self-recognition naturally initiates what I call the clearing process. When you're no longer putting energy into maintaining false identities or managing other people's expectations, that energy becomes available for processing and releasing stored emotional material. Don't be surprised if emotions, memories, or insights surface over the next few hours or days. This isn't a problem to fix. It's your system naturally clearing what's no longer needed. The 10-second reality check isn't the destination. It's proof that the destination is already here, waiting for you to stop looking everywhere else for it. When you start recognizing who you actually are, beyond the performance, beyond the defenses, something unexpected happens. The emotions you've been carrying for years, sometimes decades, suddenly have permission to surface. This isn't mystical purification or spiritual detox. This is your nervous system finally feeling safe enough to process what it's been holding. Here's what most people don't understand about authentic self-recognition. When you stop performing and defending, your body interprets this as safety. For the first time in possibly years, your system isn't scanning for threats, managing impressions, or bracing for rejection. In this state of genuine safety, stored emotional experiences that have been locked in your tissues finally have space to move. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma shows us that the body keeps score of every unresolved emotional experience. Your muscles hold tension from conversations you never had. Your chest carries the weight of grief you never fully felt. Your jaw clenches around words you never spoke. These aren't metaphors, they're measurable, physiological realities. Think about the last time you felt completely authentic with someone. Maybe you stopped trying to impress them, stopped managing their opinion of you, just existed as yourself. Did you notice what happened in your body? Often there's an initial relief, followed by something else. Sadness you didn't expect, anger that surprised you, fear that seemed to come from nowhere. The ancient Egyptians had this concept of weighing the heart against a feather. A heavy heart couldn't pass into the afterlife. Modern neuroscience gives us the real version of this wisdom. A heart heavy with unprocessed emotion creates chronic activation in your nervous system. You become reactive instead of responsive, defensive instead of open, brittle instead of resilient. When you access your authentic identity, your ren, you're not just changing how you think about yourself. You're changing your nervous system's baseline. And as that system recalibrates, everything it's been holding gets a chance to discharge. This happens in 3 distinct phases, and understanding them prevents you from getting overwhelmed or thinking something's wrong with you. First comes somatic awareness. You feel sensations in your body that don't seem connected to your current circumstances. Your chest might feel heavy during a perfectly normal day. Your throat might tighten when nothing threatening is happening. Your hands might shake when you're completely safe. This is your nervous system beginning to release stored activation. Don't analyze it. Don't fix it. Just notice it. The second phase is cognitive diffusion. Emotions arise, but instead of becoming them, you observe them. This is crucial. When anger surfaces, you don't become an angry person. You become a person experiencing anger. When shame shows up, you don't become shameful. You become someone witnessing shame move through your system. The emotion is information, not identity. The third phase is nervous system regulation. After feeling and witnessing, you return to centered presence. Your breathing deepens, your muscles release. You're still you, but you're carrying less. Let me give you specific guidance for what you'll likely encounter, because these patterns are remarkably consistent across different people. When shame arises, and it will, recognize its protective function. Shame originally developed to help you belong to your tribe. It said, change this behavior or risk rejection. But childhood shame often gets stuck, continuing to broadcast danger signals about things that aren't actually threatening your adult survival. When you feel shame during this process, you can acknowledge it. I see you. You protected me when I was small and vulnerable. You don't define who I am now. When anger surfaces, understand that anger is energy in motion. It's not inherently destructive. It's information about boundaries that were crossed, needs that weren't met, or values that were violated. Feel its energy without being driven by its agenda. Anger often carries decades of accumulated no's that you never got to express. Let it move through you without directing it at anyone, including yourself. When fear spikes, remember that fear is intelligence. It's your system's way of preparing for potential threats. But adult fear often carries the intensity of childhood powerlessness. You can acknowledge fear's intelligence while maintaining your adult perspective and resources. I've watched this process unfold in countless people. The successful executive who finally feels the loneliness of the child who learned that achievement was the only way to get attention. The chronic people pleaser who discovers decades of suppressed resentment at having their own needs consistently dismissed. The person who's always been the strong one encounters their hidden vulnerability and realizes that strength without vulnerability isn't strength, it's armor. This isn't psychological breakdown, this is integration. These emotions were always present, just buried under performance and defense. Now they have permission to complete their natural cycle. Here's the crucial distinction. Healing discharge feels like relief, even when it's intense. Rumination or re-traumatization feels like being stuck in a loop. If you find yourself spiraling rather than releasing, if the emotions feel bigger than your capacity to hold them, seek additional support. There's no shame in needing help navigating this process. The goal isn't to eliminate difficult emotions, it's to develop a mature relationship with your internal experience. When challenging emotions arise, you can speak to them directly. I see you. You protected me once. You do not name me now. This isn't spiritual bypassing or positive thinking. It's acknowledging that you can feel something without being defined by it. As you learn to work with emotions this way, something remarkable happens. You become harder to push around because you're not carrying the reactivity of unprocessed experiences. You become easier to trust because people can sense your emotional authenticity. And you become finally available to your own life because you're not spending all your energy managing what you're carrying. The emotions you've been avoiding aren't your enemies. They're the keys to your freedom. But you have to be willing to feel them, to use them. This emotional integration isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice of creating enough safety in your system for whatever needs to move to complete its cycle. Each time you do this, you reclaim a piece of your authentic self that was bound up in unfinished emotional business. Here's what nobody tells you about staying centered when everything around you is chaos. It's not about becoming some Zen master who never feels anything. Real presence under pressure is actually the opposite. It's feeling everything while choosing your response instead of letting your nervous system hijack the conversation. Let me explain what's actually happening in your brain when you master this skill. Neuroscientists call it response flexibility, that split second between when something triggers you and when you react. Most people live their entire lives without ever experiencing this pause. They go straight from trigger to reaction, like a pinball bouncing off bumpers. But when you develop this ability, you create what researchers describe as a cognitive buffer zone, where conscious choice becomes possible. Remember that 5-step sequence we explored earlier? Trigger, exhale, hum, pause, choose. This isn't just some breathing exercise, it's a precise algorithm for interrupting your automatic nervous system responses in real time. When you catch that initial trigger moment and immediately exhale, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system before your fight or flight response can fully engage. The humming creates what's called vagal toning. It literally vibrates the vagus nerve that connects your brain to your heart and gut, creating physiological coherence instead of chaos. Let's walk through how this works in situations you'll recognize. Picture that conversation where someone criticizes your work. Normally, your chest tightens, your mind starts racing with defensive arguments, and you either attack back or shut down completely. But here's what happens when you apply this technique. You feel that first spark of defensiveness. That's your trigger moment. Instead of following it, you take one conscious breath out, longer than usual. As you exhale, you make the slightest humming sound, barely audible. This takes maybe 3 seconds total. In those 3 seconds, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system shifts from reactive to responsive. Now when you speak, your voice comes from a different place, not from the wounded part that needs to defend itself, but from the part of you that can actually hear what's being said and respond thoughtfully. You might say something like, "I want to understand what you're seeing that I'm missing." One short sentence, then you let it land before you say anything else. This is what psychologists call interpersonal effectiveness. Your communication becomes more powerful because it's coming from presence rather than pressure. People can feel the difference immediately. They're expecting defensiveness or aggression, and instead they get clarity. It completely changes the dynamic. Here's another scenario. You're in a work meeting and anxiety usually turns your brain to fog. You know you have valuable input, but the moment attention turns to you, your mind goes blank. With this practice, you catch that first wave of anxiety before it crashes over you. Quick exhale, subtle hum, pause. Now, instead of fighting the anxiety or trying to push through it, you're working with your nervous system. You speak slower than feels natural. You finish your sentences completely. You let silence do some of the work instead of rushing to fill every gap. What you'll discover is that this approach doesn't make you passive, it makes you more genuinely assertive. There's a huge difference between aggression that comes from reactivity and strength that comes from centeredness. When you're not being pushed around by your own emotional reactions, you can actually maintain appropriate boundaries without becoming hostile. I need to address something important here. This practice can feel weird at first, especially if you're used to high-intensity interactions. Some people worry they'll become emotionally flat or lose their edge. But here's what actually happens. You become more emotionally intelligent, not less emotional. You still feel everything deeply, but you're not controlled by those feelings. For natural people pleasers, this technique is revolutionary because it creates space to find your actual voice instead of just saying what you think others want to hear. When you pause between trigger and response, you can ask yourself, what do I actually think about this? Instead of automatically agreeing to keep the peace. If you're naturally more aggressive in your communication style, this practice helps you get your point across without leaving casualties. Your passion doesn't disappear, it becomes more focused and effective because it's not mixed with reactivity that puts people on the defensive. For those who tend toward anxiety, this becomes your anchor. Instead of getting swept away by worst-case scenarios or mental spirals, you have a concrete way to stay grounded in the present moment where you actually have some control. Now, let's be practical about implementation. You're going to forget. You'll get halfway through an argument before you remember you had a choice about how to respond. That's completely normal. The moment you notice you're caught in reactivity, that noticing itself is the beginning of freedom. You can literally pause mid-conversation and say, let me start that over, then apply the technique. Start practicing during low-stakes situations. Use it when you're slightly annoyed in traffic instead of waiting for the major confrontation at work. Notice how walking just a bit slower changes your internal state. Pay attention to how finishing your sentences completely, even in casual conversation, affects how people listen to you. The goal isn't perfection, it's building your capacity to stay true to your values even when facing social pressure or emotional manipulation. When you can maintain this kind of presence under pressure, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being an active participant in creating the interactions you want to have. This skill connects directly to living authentically because it allows you to respond from who you actually are rather than from your conditioned patterns of reactivity. That's where real power lives, not in controlling others, but in choosing your own responses consciously. Here's the critical truth about building a sustainable awakening practice. The moment you turn authentic self-recognition into another item on your spiritual to-do list, you've already lost the essence of what you're trying to cultivate. I see this mistake constantly. People approach presence like they approach fitness routines or productivity systems, with charts, apps, and performance metrics. They meditate for 30 days straight, then beat themselves up for missing day 31. They create elaborate morning rituals that work beautifully until life throws them a curveball, then abandon the whole thing because it's not working anymore. The neuroscience research on habit formation reveals something fascinating. Small, consistent actions literally rewire our brains more effectively than intense but sporadic efforts. When you practice authentic self-recognition for just 2 minutes daily, you're creating neural pathways that strengthen with repetition. Your brain begins to default toward presence rather than reactivity. But when you try to meditate for an hour once a week, you're essentially starting from scratch each time. Let's start with the foundation. How you begin each day sets your nervous system's baseline before the world starts making demands on your attention. Instead of reaching for your phone the moment you wake up, spend 60 seconds simply noticing that you exist. Not thinking about existing, not analyzing your existence, just the direct recognition of being aware, being here, being you beneath all the roles and responsibilities. This isn't about creating a perfect morning routine. It's about establishing a moment of authentic contact with yourself before the performance begins. When your nervous system starts from this place of grounded presence, you're less likely to get swept away by the first crisis email or traffic jam you encounter. Now, throughout your day, your psyche will give you precise feedback about when you've disconnected from this authentic center. I call these red flags. Those moments when you notice your jaw clenching during a meeting, when you've been scrolling social media for 20 minutes without realizing it, when you snap at someone over something trivial. Here's what most people get wrong. They treat these moments as failures, as evidence they're not spiritual enough or not disciplined enough. This is backwards thinking. The moment you notice you've been unconscious is actually the moment you become conscious again. That awareness itself is success, not failure. Your job isn't to never get caught in reactive patterns, it's to notice more quickly when you do. If it used to take you 3 hours to realize you were stressed and disconnected, and now it takes 30 minutes, that's genuine progress. You're developing what psychologists call metacognition, awareness of your own awareness. The most reliable way to maintain this practice isn't through willpower or memory, it's through environmental cues. Choose specific thresholds in your daily life as automatic reminders. Every doorway you walk through, every time you sit in your car, every time you log into your computer. These physical transitions become anchors for conscious presence. When you reach for a door handle, pause for one breath and recognize who's reaching. When you start your car, take a moment to notice who's about to drive. When you type your password, remember who's behind the screen. These micro moments of recognition accumulate into a fundamentally different way of being in the world. The question of information diet becomes crucial here, not from a place of fear or control, but from understanding how what you consume affects your nervous system's ability to maintain authentic self-recognition. When you're constantly absorbing content designed to trigger anxiety, outrage, or comparison, you're making it exponentially harder to stay connected to your actual experience. This looks different for everyone. The busy parent might only have moments between demands. Perfect. Use the transition between helping one child and attending to another as a reminder to notice who's helping, who's caring. The office worker surrounded by artificial urgency can use the walk from their desk to the bathroom as a reset moment. The student navigating social pressures can use the transition between classes as a brief return to authentic presence. The evening practice of reviewing your day serves as a form of cognitive behavioral therapy for your identity. Instead of just replaying what happened, notice which version of yourself showed up in different situations. When were you performing a role versus expressing authentic presence? When did you feel heavy with pretense versus light with genuine connection? This is what I call the feather test, tracking whether your daily choices make your heart feel heavier or lighter. It's remarkably accurate. When you're aligned with authentic values and expressing genuine presence, there's a quality of lightness, even during difficult conversations or challenging tasks. When you're performing, people-pleasing, or abandoning yourself to fit in, everything feels heavier, more effortful. The biggest obstacles to maintaining this practice are predictable. Perfectionism will try to turn presence into a performance you can succeed or fail at. Spiritual materialism will attempt to make awareness into an achievement you can accumulate. Social pressure from people who prefer the old, more predictable version of you will create subtle resistance. During difficult periods, illness, relationship stress, work pressure, the temptation is to abandon self-care precisely when it's most needed. This is when the practice proves its worth. You don't need to maintain elaborate routines when life is falling apart. You just need to remember, moment by moment, that beneath whatever is happening, you still exist. The awareness experiencing the crisis is itself unshaken. The profound shift happens when these small moments of conscious presence accumulate into a new baseline. Instead of occasionally remembering to be present, you occasionally forget. Instead of authentic self-recognition being something you do, it becomes something you are. The practice dissolves into a way of being that requires no maintenance because it's simply how you naturally exist in the world. This is how genuine transformation happens, not through dramatic spiritual experiences or intensive retreats, but through the patient cultivation of authentic presence in ordinary moments, until the extraordinary reveals itself as having been here all along. When you start living from authentic self-recognition, something profound shifts. The freedom to choose consciously comes with an equally profound responsibility. You become accountable for those choices in ways you never were before. This isn't the heavy burden of guilt or shame you might expect. It's the clean accountability of someone who can finally see clearly. The practice we've explored throughout this journey brings both liberation and obligation. You can no longer pretend you don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it. The unconscious patterns that once ran your life become visible, and with that visibility comes choice. With choice comes responsibility. Here's where many people stumble. They mistake authentic presence for a license to bypass the messy realities of human life. They think awakening means floating above emotions, relationships, and practical responsibilities. This is spiritual bypassing at its most seductive, using consciousness work to avoid the very experiences that develop genuine wisdom. Real awakening makes you more human, not less. When you recognize your authentic nature, you don't transcend emotions, you feel them more clearly. You don't rise above relationships, you engage more honestly. You don't escape practical responsibilities, you handle them with greater integrity. Watch out for integrity. The ego inflation that whispers you've arrived somewhere special. Temporary states of clarity aren't permanent achievements. The moment you start viewing yourself as more evolved than others, you've lost the plot entirely. Authentic presence is naturally humble because it recognizes the interconnectedness of all experience. Everyone is struggling with the same fundamental questions about identity and meaning, just in different costumes. Then there's the missionary zeal, the compulsion to fix everyone else's consciousness without their permission. You see through certain illusions now, so surely everyone needs to hear about it, right? Wrong. This urge to recruit and convert comes from the same ego that once sought validation through conformity. Now it seeks validation through being the awakened one who saves others. Keep the practice private. Avoid the performance. When you truly understand something, you don't need to broadcast it for approval. Your presence speaks louder than your proclamations. People will notice the change in how you listen, how you respond under pressure, how you handle conflict. They'll sense something different long before you say a word about consciousness or awakening. The integration challenges are real and ongoing. How do you maintain authentic self-recognition while fulfilling social roles that seem to demand persona and performance? You learn to inhabit roles without being consumed by them. You can be a professional, parent, or partner without losing yourself in those identities. The roles become costumes you wear consciously rather than prisons that define you. Setting boundaries becomes crucial, but not the rigid walls of someone protecting themselves from the world. These are the fluid boundaries of someone who knows their own center. You can engage fully without losing yourself. You can say no without aggression and yes without resentment. You can speak truth without becoming combative about it. Your relationships will shift, sometimes dramatically. Some people will appreciate your increased presence and authenticity. They'll feel safer being real around you because you're no longer performing or demanding they perform for you. Others may feel threatened by someone who can no longer be easily manipulated or controlled through guilt, fear, or social pressure. This isn't about becoming difficult or uncooperative. It's about becoming genuinely responsive rather than reactively compliant. You fulfill commitments because you choose to, not because you're afraid of disappointing people. You keep promises because integrity matters to you, not because you need approval. The timeline for integration unfolds over months and years, not days or weeks. Initially, you might experience dramatic shifts in perception that feel revolutionary. Don't mistake these peak experiences for the end goal. The real work happens in the valleys, maintaining clarity during mundane Tuesday afternoons, staying present during family arguments, keeping your center when someone pushes all your buttons. Expect phases. Sometimes the practice feels effortless and natural. Other times you'll wonder if you imagined the whole thing. This isn't regression. It's the natural rhythm of deepening understanding. Each cycle brings greater stability and less dramatic fluctuation. The social implications extend far beyond personal transformation. When you live authentically, you give others permission to do the same. Family systems begin to shift as one person stops playing their assigned role in the dysfunction. Communities change when individuals refuse to participate in collective delusions. This connects to larger movements toward conscious living and social justice, not through preaching or activism, but through the simple radical act of being real. When you do share this work, remember, share your experience, not your certainty. Invite, don't recruit. Tell people what happened to you, not what they should do. Your story might resonate with someone ready to hear it, but forcing awakening on others creates the opposite effect. What becomes possible when people live from authentic self-recognition? Communication becomes cleaner because you're not managing hidden agendas. Choices become more sustainable because they align with your actual values rather than borrowed shoulds. Relationships deepen because intimacy requires authenticity. Creative solutions emerge because you're not locked into habitual patterns of thinking. Living authentically in a world that often rewards conformity requires tremendous courage. The pressure to fit in, to not rock the boat, to keep everyone comfortable, runs deep. But the alternative, spending your life performing someone else's version of who you should be, leads to a particular kind of death while still breathing. This path leads to genuine fulfillment rather than temporary satisfaction. Not the fleeting high of getting what you thought you wanted, but the deep contentment of being who you actually are. It's the difference between winning a game you don't care about and playing a game that matters to you, regardless of the outcome. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.